Ivor, before we begin, two things. One, what is your name? And when there's a title or a handle attached to it, what do we call you?
Well, my Christian name is Ivar, and my middle name's Alexander Michael Mountbatten, Mountbatten being my last name. And I was born the second son of a marquis, and therefore the younger children of marquises and dukes have the courtesy title of Lord or Lady, Christian name, and then the family last name, which in my case is Mountbatten.
So you are Lord Ivar Mountbatten.
Correct.
And if I was meeting you formally, would I call you Lord Ivar?
That is correct, yes.
Fine. To call you Lord Mountbatten would be incorrect.
Would be incorrect, which would, because it would assume that I was a peer in my own right, which I am not. I have a courtesy title for my lifetime, and that is it. It doesn't get passed on to my children.
Now, for people who don't understand the pecking order of the British aristocracy, it begins with royal dukes, then you get dukes, then you get a marquis, then you come down to...
Viscounts?
No, an earl.
Earl, yes,
before
correct,
the viscount.
Absolutely.
And then we come down to the mere barons,
Absolutely.
that we don't need to bother with in this
Correct.
kind of...
And then I think there's a baronet.
There is indeed.
And they are part of the aristocracy, aren't they, I assume?
They are.
Yes.
So I've got the name right. You are Lord Ivar, but because I know you, I'm going to call you Ivar, if
Please
I may.
do, absolutely.
I-V-A-R.
I-V-A-R, which is a Norwegian name, apparently, and in Norway it's pronounced Ivar. And the reason I was called Ivar, that's how we pronounce it, I suppose, in the UK, is because my mother's first cousin was a chap called Ivor Bryce, and as a result, my mother called me Ivor.
Now, to modern ears, the Mountbatten name is famous for a variety of reasons. One is because of Earl Mountbatten of Burma, who was your uncle or great-uncle?
He was my great-uncle, yes. He was my grandfather's younger brother.
So your grandfather was the second Marquess of Milford Haven.
Correct.
Hey, I've got that right.
You've done your homework.
The second Marquess of Milford Haven, and he was called George.
Correct.
And he had a brother who was Louis Mountbatten.
Correct.
And a sister who was Alice Mountbatten, who married a Greek prince and was the mother of Prince Phillip.
Correct. And he also had another sister called Louise, who married Karl Adolf of Sweden, King Karl Adolf of Sweden.
And all of you are descended from Queen Victoria.
Again, correct, yes. So Queen Victoria was my great-grandmother. Through her second daughter, Alice, who married the Grand Duke of Hesse, and they had a number of children, including Alexandra, who married the Tsar of Russia, Ella, who married Grand Duke Serge of Russia, and a number of others. And Victoria was my great-grandmother, and she was I think she was the older sister to Ella and Alexandra.
And somewhere along the line, among your forebears, is Pushkin, the Russian poet and short story writer. Is this
Absolutely
possible?
Correct. And
where does he come in?
So my grandfather George, the second Marquis, married the daughter of Grand Duke Michael of Russia. And his father was Grand Duke Michael as well, but he was called Grand Duke Michael Nikhailovich. Nikhailovich meaning the son of Nicholas. Nicholas the First of Russia, absolutely.
I'm right in saying that the first Marquess of Milford Haven, his family name had been Battenberg. But during the First World War, because of anti-German sentiment, the family name was changed from Battenberg to Mountbatten, and other names were changed, and Milford Haven was introduced as the name for the marquisate. Is that right?
Correct. As a result of anti-German feeling, all the various branches of the royal family had to change their name, and King George asked the Battenbergs, and there were two brothers at that point, Henry, who'd married Queen Victoria's youngest daughter, Beatrice, and his brother Louis had married Queen Victoria's eldest granddaughter, Victoria. So the two brothers married aunt and niece. And so they both changed their names with the surname Mountbatten, which is a direct translation, My great-grandfather took Milford Haven because it was a naval port and he had naval connections. He was offered a dukedom, as various other branches were, but I read in his memoir that he didn't want to become a duke because a dukedom generally signified you were the illegitimate son of a monarch, which he said, I am certainly not. And therefore he took the next step down, which was a marquisate.
So your great-grandfather was the first Marquess of Milford Haven. Your grandfather was the second Marquess of Milford Haven.
Correct.
George.
Yes.
Noted for a number of things, any of which you wish to share with us instantly before we move on to you?
Well, he was a very intelligent chap and charming, and I believe I asked, he died very young.
He died of cancer in the late 1930s.
I believe so. And yes, he fell down. He was the first non-Jewish director of Marks and Spencer. Oh. And he was having dinner with the Siefs or the Marks, I can't remember which one, but and he fell after dinner, leaving the house, and broke his hip. And I think that is generally a precursor to to cancer. I think he had a prostate cancer. It had gone through into his bones, which was very sad. But he was a very popular chap, and actually not many people knew him terribly well because, of the family, that is. But I did ask the Queen occasionally when I sat next to her, and I said, what was George
This
like?
Is the late Queen Elizabeth
Late Queen
II.
Elizabeth, yes. And she said he was her favourite uncle, and that he was charming, and everybody adored George. And he died when she was 12, and I think for her to say something like that must have meant that he really was, because not that many older people are sort of much fun to sit next to.
Well, he clearly was delightful, because Prince Philip, as you know, I wrote the biography of Prince Philip, Duke of Edinburgh, and people always associated Prince Philip with Lord Mountbatten, Louis Mountbatten.
Absolutely.
Saw him as his sort of almost his godfather, like a father substitute. Prince Philip slightly resented that because he said actually George was the one who was his guardian, but then George died young.
Absolutely.
But he always spoke highly of George, your grandfather. But I learnt somewhere along the line, maybe I've imagined this, you can put me right, that George is the same person who has what is known as the largest private collection of pornography in Europe.
I'd forgotten that. Yes, apparently, yes, he did. And a few people have asked where it was, and I do remember there was a desk in our bedroom at where I grew up, at a place called Moynes Park. And we found the key, I think, and inside there was a box of pornography, which for young boys was frightfully amusing. But there were just a few bits left.
So we've established who your great-grandfather is, your grandfather, your father. Well, I think we've now got to you. So we know the context of your family. It's enormously distinguished. Oh, we should say the name Mountbatten still resonates because of Prince Philip, who was a Mountbatten. He was your uncle.
Prince Philip was my first cousin once removed.
Fine. Okay.
And he was a Greek prince. And of course, the last name of the Greek royal family is
something very complicated.
Very complicated. It's about 4 names long. And I think when he was becoming naturalized in order to marry Princess Elizabeth, he basically took his mother's maiden name rather than his father's name.
So he married as Philip Mountbatten.
Correct.
And which delighted, I know,
Uncle Dickie, of
Uncle
course.
Dickie Mountbatten, hugely. And he rather expected, because it had been so with Prince Albert, that the royal family would take the name of the father.
Yes.
So he rather assumed his children would all be called Mountbatten.
Mountbatten, correct.
But the powers that be felt that wasn't appropriate.
Well, I think Uncle Dickie was a sort of character that was a bit of a Marmite character. You either liked him or disliked him. And he rubbed a lot of people up the wrong way. Not that I know that, but I've just heard it on the grapevine. But one of them was, I think, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, and she took a bit of exception to this. And I think Queen Mary, was she alive at the time?
She was.
So, and they sort of called up Winston Churchill, who was another character who wasn't overly enamoured by Uncle Dickie. And I think they all sort of nobbled the Queen and said, no, this couldn't happen. So,
and I think there was a feeling too, shortly after the war, they'd gone to such trouble to make the family Windsor
Yeah.
during the First World War. Why change it now?
Yes.
But eventually, Prince Philip prevailed. And
Well, you probably know better than I do. I assume you chatted to Prince Philip about this. The whole name issue.
the whole name issue
Yeah.
had been a hot issue
Yeah.
for him in the early years of his marriage. Later on, I think he was calmer about it, and he was satisfied because Mountbatten Windsor was introduced as a family name for certain members of the family.
I believe for all the younger children, not in the direct line of succession, took the name Mountbatten Windsor. Correct.
Which is how, for example, Prince Harry is Mountbatten Windsor, Meghan is Mountbatten Windsor.
Yes.
Their children will be Mountbatten Windsors.
Absolutely.
So the name Mountbatten is resonating. And we have in our presence Lord Ivar Mountbatten of this fascinating family. But now I've got to know you, I find you're a fascinating person, which is why we're here on Rosebud. And I want to ask you this. It's our first question. Quite simply, Ivar, what is your very first memory?
Well, as you can imagine, I've had to give this a little bit of thought, but I do have one. And that was actually of my father pruning the roses. And I remember it distinctly because I loved the smell of the roses, and they were particularly fragrant outside our playroom, actually. And I picked up a petal that he had dropped or had come off the prunings, and I screwed it up or rolled it up into a ball to smell it, and it smelled so wonderful, I actually shoved it up my nose. And then I was in a real panic because I couldn't get the damn thing out. And so it's one of the very few memories I have of my father, and he died when I was 7. So I must have been 6.5 or 7 or something around that.
Where
age.
would this have been?
And this was at Tyndon Manor, which was a house in Great Stamford in Essex. And my mother grew up in a very large house called Moynes Park. But my mother's a little confusing only because she was born in Bermuda. And she was born Janet Bryce, and my grandmother didn't want my mother to grow up on the island and to marry a local island boy. So she sent him to finishing school in Paris. And her brother-in-law, a chap called Ivar Bryce, effectively took her on and adopted her, more or less, as his own, because he had no children. And this gentleman, Ivar Bryce, is quite well known because he was one of the precursors or the models for James Bond.
Oh.
And Ivar Bryce married a very rich American lady called Jo Hartford, and she was the heiress to the A&P fortune. And if you remember...
It's a supermarket, Miles.
Exactly. The A&P was the largest company, or the second largest company, private company in America, on par with Ford Motor Company. And it was equivalent of Tesco here in the UK. Anyway, Ivar Bryce married Jo Hartford, but they didn't have any children themselves, and effectively adopted my mother. This is Ivar.
This is an extraordinary heritage. We have Queen Victoria, we have, I think, a Tsar, we have Pushkin, we now have the A&P fortune.
A&P fortune.
And we have James Bond.
And we have James Bond, absolutely.
Well, my gosh.
Getting back to Ivar, of course, he grew up in this huge Elizabethan mansion called Moynes Park. And he became friends with Ian. He met Ian in Cornwall.
This is Ian
Fleming, yes. And they were lifelong friends. Anyway, Ivar was an agent in the OSS, which is the precursor to the CIA, and was based in New York. And he was the one that basically had his martinis shaken, not stirred.
So he is, as it were, your adopted grandfather.
He was my adopted... We called him Uncle Ivar, but effectively he was like a grandfather. Yeah. And so when my mother sort of spent her more formative years, late teenage years at Moynes Park, and that's where I grew up effectively. But she then married my father, David Milford Haven, and Ivar Bryce gave as a wedding present Tyndon Manor, which was all of 4 or 5 miles away from Moynes. And that's where I grew up until the age of 7 when my father died. Then my mother didn't want to have it was a large manor house. She didn't want to live there on her own without my father, so she sold that and moved us all back 5 miles away, back to Moynes Park, age 7. So from the age of 7 until I sold Moynes in 1997, that's where I lived.
And that was a huge house.
It was a huge house.
Before we get to that period, just give me your parents together.
Of course, I didn't know my father because he died when I was 7.
Well, did you not know him? You say that. What memories do you have of him?
This wonderful memory of...
That's it.
Wonderful. It was this memory of me putting this rose petal...
Is that about it?
Rosebud, I should say. Look, there
very
you
good.
go.
Is that about it?
That is literally it. And I think he was a great sailor, of course. He loved sailing at Cowes. And I remember once he took us on... he had a sailboat, a dragon, I think it was, and we went out, and of course my father was a bit haphazard, and he got stuck on a sandbank, and we were out there for 6 hours, and my mother was spitting mad because, I was out there aged... whatever it was, for hours, until the tide came back up and the boat floated off again. And I do remember being on his dragon.
Did he die running for a train? Have I mentioned that on a platform?
Because he was a stockbroker after the war. He was in the Navy, and then he became a stockbroker, and he was running for the train, Liverpool Street Station, and he had a massive heart attack.
And how did you hear the news? How was it broken to you?
Again, I just remember a lot of wailing. I think my mother was very upset,
she was
clearly,
wailing, yeah.
yes. And I believe she heard it on the news,
on
the 6 o'clock news, or just before. That's, I think, we, as the children, because in the nursery, the news was on. And
it's worth reminding people that he would have been famous not only because he was the Marquess of Milford Haven, but also because he was Prince Phillip's, the Duke of Edinburgh's friend, and had been his best man. He was a public figure because of that.
Absolutely, he was. And of course, if you all the pictures of the royal wedding, there's my father was standing the other side of the Queen.
And how did your mother cope? Did she ever talk about him, or did she talk much about him?
She did, and funnily enough, I did find a letter in my grandmother's papers years later from my mother, saying that she was getting very irritated by my father, and she was thinking that she couldn't cope any longer, and she might want to divorce him. And my grandmother wrote back, and the letter my grandmother wrote back was also in the papers, and it was saying that my mother should pull her socks up and not be so stupid. David may have his faults, but he was a very, very kind man, and she should thank her lucky stars. And my grandmother didn't want to hear any more of it, and that was it. So I know there must have been a little bit of a sort of...
bit of tension.
Yeah. But then my mother was a very, very spoilt woman and never had to do anything in her life. She never had a job. Was, as I say, she was looked after by...
she had this hugely wealthy...
step-grandmother, or sort of... They were effectively her parents.
Did she marry again?
No, she never did. She she had a string of boyfriends. One of them was Sir Charles Claw.
She liked to stay where the money was.
Yes, exactly.
Because didn't he own Selfridges at the time?
He did. He owned Selfridges. He owned Mappin and Webb. He owned Dulcis and...
yes, she should get her shoes and her silverware, everything she wanted.
No, she said whenever she went into Selfridges, all the staff would come flying around her, and she could have had anything she wanted, but she really didn't need anything.
How were you and she together? What did she give you? What did you give her?
It's interesting. Both my brother and myself have a quite a tortuous relationship with her. She never looked after us. We were brought up by nannies, and we had this wonderful German nanny who looked after us right from the word go. She was my father's housekeeper originally, and then she turned into a nanny, and that was it. She looked after us. In fact, I went on holiday with my nanny because Nanny would refuse my mother to look after us because she knew she couldn't.
She'd be hopeless.
She would be absolutely hopeless. So we didn't really see her very much as youngsters. And when I then moved on to Moynes Park, age 7 after my father died, we had enormous staff. I mean, it really was like living in Downton Abbey. And this was all paid for by the sort of A&P money. And so we had a butler, we had 2 footmen, there was like 5 housemaids, there was a cook, and we always called the cook Mrs. Backler. So the cook in big households was always known as Mrs. And she was Mrs. Backler, and then there was 2 scullery maids, and my mother had a lady's maid, as did my grandmother, my step-grandmother, when I say that, Aunt Jo. And then, numerous gardeners. So it really was like living in Downton Abbey.
And what was that like for you as a boy? I mean,
well, it was just fabulous.
Oh.
Absolutely. I mean, as I say, I had the most amazing, childhood.
What was your bedroom like?
It was huge. I mean, we're sitting in a room here. It was probably twice the size of this. Maybe 2.5 sizes. And I shared it initially with my brother. He was on one end, and then I was at the other. And then I think after a couple of years, I sort of wanted my own bedroom, and I think George wanted his own bedroom. And my step-grandmother, I say step-grandmother, we called her Aunt Jo. She lived most of the time in America, and she only came over to England for the racing season. Because we had a big stud at Moynes, and she had a lot of very valuable bloodstock. So she would always arrive in time for Royal Ascot. And in the 50s, her income was somewhere along the line. I heard it was something like $50,000 or $60,000 a day.
Give me a day.
A day, yes. I mean, immense. And she held the record on the Queen Mary for the most amount of trunks, and that was like 72, all matching Louis Vuitton trunks. Because in those days, you didn't travel. You had to travel with everything, and she bought all her own bed linen, and you couldn't possibly use somebody else's bed linen. Even though she owned the house, she travelled with her own bed linen, everything. And I always remember we knew when Aunt Jo was arriving because a Pantechnicon would arrive from Southampton with all this luggage, and the whole house would be in upheaval.
And was she affectionate to you? Did you feel fond
I
of
got
her?
on very well with her, actually. My brother always said I was always sucked up to her.
Explain about you and your mother.
So, yes, my mother never looked after us at all. We were brought up by this wonderful German nanny called Maria, and we were always shipped off here, there, and everywhere, which was fine. And actually, I'm not complaining in any way, shape, or form. However, what did irritate both George and I know, because when our children were growing up, we would often say to her, "Why didn't you come down for Christmas? Why didn't you come down for the weekend?" Her stock answer was, "I can't be bothered."
Gosh, I can't be bothered.
I know.
Not I'm too busy.
No,
I just simply can't be bothered.
I can't be bothered. And it stemmed from the fact that she had never been able to pack her own suitcase. So she could never. She might come down for the day, and I lived in Devon, so that was a 3-hour drive, and then she'd go back again because she couldn't be bothered to pack a suitcase, or she didn't know how to.
Gosh, how extraordinary. What is your best recollection of your best moment with your mother during your childhood?
Crikey. There was one holiday. When I say it wasn't really a holiday, my mother accompanied Charles Claw to Deauville to go racing. And I was hoiked along for some reason. I think probably because I was relatively young. And we went in his private plane, which this must have been in the 70s, which was quite extravagant in those days. And we stayed in the Royal Hotel in Deauville. And my mother was always going out to dinner, and she looked like Sophia Loren. I mean, she was a beautiful woman. And I was, generally 8 in the room, and I formed a relationship with the room service chap, who was a sort of rather sweet guy, and he always brought me my dinner. Anyway, this one evening, I had spaghetti bolognese, and he brought it to me, and he said, "Oh, this is going to be delicious. You must finish it all." Anyway, I didn't really want to upset him, and I couldn't finish it, so I put the remains down the loo. And of course, I was sharing a room with my mother, and my mother came back from dinner, went into the loo, and of course the loo was blocked. So she immediately called the room sort of service, and the gentleman that had given me my my spaghetti, because he was quite chuffed when he took my plate away and it was finished, and I said how wonderful it was. Oh. And then about an hour later, he turned up with a plunger. And plunged
retrieved
the loo.
Your spaghetti.
And all the spaghetti came up, and I was mortified.
Oh.
But that was always one fun time. I mean, not that it.
But that's interesting. Fun, but the fun time with your mother involves you and the room service guy and spaghetti. Your mother really is.
She was just an ancillary part
of it. She's a bit character in this story. Would you have a particularly painful memory? I mean, is there a time that you and your older brother George, only 18 months older than you, where you felt particularly hurt or neglected or...
No, we were never hurt or neglected at all.
You accepted this as the way of life.
Yeah, we had the most wonderful life. And I always say that I've got nothing to complain about. I'm one of those people that just gets on with it. And I never complain, principally because I know that I've had the most wonderful childhood life, and I still have the most wonderful life, and I've got nothing to complain about. So,
when you meet your mother now, because she's still with us, though quite elderly, is there affection between you?
No. No. And I say that quite forthrightly. During the pandemic, we brought her down. She has never broken into a sweat. She always said that, ladies shouldn't sweat. And she's never sort of put herself out, ever. And she had a new hip, and she doesn't do pain. And her hip didn't work, principally because she refused to do all the remedial work that you have to do with a new hip, because it was too painful. And of course her hip seized up, and then she took to her bed, and she never got out of it. So she's been bedridden for the last... since 2018, I think.
Oh, no.
Yeah. And it's laziness. And so that sort of irritated my brother and myself. So we've ended up having to do everything for her. And so during the pandemic, we felt we ought to bring her down from London because she had a string of carers, and clearly COVID was going to get her, or so we thought. Actually, she did have COVID, and she breezed through COVID. not a bit of it. Anyway, so we brought her down, and we installed her initially in the morning room at Bridwell, in my home. And funnily enough, when we brought her down in an ambulance, and we then James and I and George and everybody, we all sort of brought her furniture in. We tried to make the morning room in Bridwell, which is quite a large room, as a sort of a replica of her room in London. And she actually accused James of stealing her TV, because she said to James...
This is James,
my husband. She said, "James, now what's happened with my television?" And James said, "Well, what do you mean?" And he said, "That's your television." She said, "No, it's not. It's far too small. My television was much bigger." And James says, "Yes, that's because the room's much bigger and it's much further away." But she wasn't having any of it. And she said, "Just tell me, if you've sold it, I won't be cross."
Bless her.
But
you were clearly, there is some residual affection.
Yes,
obviously, in a funny sort of way, would you still say you love her because she's your mother?
I've often thought about this, and it's sort of, this is all quite personal, but I mean, I've thought about it. When she finally goes, will I be sad? And I suppose, yes, I will be sad, but what sort of irritated me is she would call me all the time when she was at home, because after the pandemic finished and we needed to move her, we moved her into the lodge with her carer, because we started doing our weddings again, and we needed the
This is
sort
at
of
your
morning
house,
room.
Bridwell,
Yes,
you do.
exactly. So we needed the morning room sort of for corporate events. So we moved her into the lodge with her carer. And every 2 minutes, you know, as a lot of mothers do, she would call me, "When are you coming to see me? When are you coming to see me?" And yet, when I was younger, I'd say to her, "When are you coming to see me?" And she would always come back with, "I can't be bothered." So I then turned this round and said, "You know, Mama, I'm busy. I am doing this, that, and the other. At this moment, I'm sorry, I can't come down."
But
I turned it round.
I'm interested. You can't bring yourself to say to her, "I can't be bothered."
I did say once or twice,
Oh.
just when, you know, but yeah, but she's quite stoical herself, you know, and she just...
And she gave you a wonderful childhood, even if she wasn't part of it.
She did.
Through Maria, the nanny,
Through the nanny.
the beautiful home, and all the things that money can buy.
Absolutely. But as I say, it wasn't her money, it was her
Yeah.
stepfather's or uncle or whatever.
But
we like
without
to call it.
her, there wouldn't have been the money.
No, that's
And without
true.
her, you wouldn't be here.
No, very true.
So
So for that, I can't be great. I'm not ungrateful because, as I said, we had the most perfect childhood.
And she chose your schools? What school did you go to? What
Well,
was the first school you went to?
after my father died, everything was handed over to Uncle Dickie. So he basically...
This is Uncle Dickie
Yes,
Mountbatten.
Dickie Mountbatten.
Earl
So he
Mountbatten of Burma.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He was more or less the head of the family. And so when my grandfather died, who was looking after Prince Phillip and my father, of course, Dickie stepped in. Because Dickie Mountbatten had 2 daughters, so there was Patricia and Pammy. So the sons, if he ever wanted them, was basically his 2 nephews, Philip and my father. And so when my father died, my mother sort of basically turned to Dickie, and sort of he was in charge of education. So we went to a prep school called Heatherdown, both George and myself, where Prince Andrew and Prince Edward were also at Heatherdown, and I'm not entirely sure how that came about. I'm assuming, again, it was Uncle Dickie that organised this. After Heatherdown, we then all went to Gordonston, where Prince Philip was. And again, I'm assuming Prince Philip sort of organised that for his children. And then Uncle Dickie said, "Actually, why didn't, you know, your 2 boys go?" And of course, all the cousins went, because all the Natchballs went, and India Hicks. So all the Mountbatten cousins, everybody, you know, in terms of the extended royal
What
family.
did you make of Mountbatten, Dickie Mountbatten?
Ooh, now I was thinking about this the other day. He could be quite a scary character, and one of my first memories of him was at Classborne Castle in Ireland, where he was ultimately assassinated. And we used to go there for holidays in the summer. So all the sort of Natchball, Mountbatten cousins, so the Hickses and Natchballs and George and myself used to go to Classborne every summer. And so Uncle Dickie was wonderful in keeping the family together in that sense, because it made us very close to our cousins.
The extended family is all there
Yes.
in Ireland
Yes.
for holidays.
Yeah.
What was Uncle Dickie like?
So, Uncle Dickie, my first memory really of him was shouting at me because we went shrimping in Mullaghmore Harbour. And it was just Uncle Dickie and myself, and I think maybe India was there, and we all had our shrimping nets, and we had a whole bucket full of shrimps, which then I proceeded to upend, and they all disappeared. And I just remember Uncle Dickie screaming at me, "You stupid boy!" Anyway, so I was a bit terrified of him occasionally, but actually he was a very soft character. And later on, when I was older, he was always worried about being slouched, and so we used to have to stand him up against a wall and push his shoulders back.
God.
And he had this wonderful trick. Every time you pushed his shoulders back, he would fart.
Oh, no.
Yeah, but he did that on purpose, just for the grandchildren. Yeah. But of course, so we have a completely different view of him rather than most people.
How old were you by the time when he was assassinated?
I was 17. Yes. So I was, as I said, I was in America looking at universities. And I remember it very well because I was staying with my grandmother, or as I called her, Aunt Jo, at Black Hole Hollow Farm, which was very close to Saratoga Racecourse. I mean, it was about an hour away. And funnily enough, just as a side, Ian Fleming always used to, go up and stay up there. And the front cover of Diamonds Are Forever is, the original front cover is a woman's neck with a huge diamond. Mm-hmm. And that was called Afghanistan, and it was Aunt Jo's diamond.
Oh, gosh.
And this was a 72 or 74 carat diamond. It was enormous, and she used to wear it on her ring. And in those days, it was very chic. And she wore it on a scarf around her waist. So the scarf would be a belt, and she would have this huge ring in a clasp hanging from this scarf. This is a rather wonderful story of her going out one evening in New York with my uncle and a few other friends, and I think they sort of went to Mortimer's or something because she had a lovely townhouse on 74th Street. Anyway, she got back home later that evening, went to take off her scarf with the diamond on it, and lo and behold, the diamond had come out of the clasp. Just the clasp was there. So she immediately dispatched her maid round to the restaurant to see if they could find the diamond. Of course, the restaurant had closed. So the maid was dispatched first thing in the morning to find the diamond, and the maid goes into the restaurant, and lo and behold, there was the diamond sitting in the mint jar by the till.
Oh.
And of course, nobody in their right mind could have thought it was a diamond. They thought it was a piece of the chandelier.
Of course.
And had just fallen off. So the cleaners had picked up this diamond and put it on the front desk in the mint jar.
Brilliant.
Isn't it wonderful?
And this is literally a priceless 72 carat diamond.
A named diamond.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Anyway, so I was staying with Aunt Jo at Black Hole Hollow Farm, and this was August 27th, 1979, of course. And I'd gone to a Doobie Brothers concert the night before. Anyway, the next morning, my aunt's lady's maid came knocking on my bedroom door and said, Monsieur Ivar, Mrs. Bryce wants to see you straight away. So I thought, oh God, what have I done? I came in very late. Maybe she's going to tell me off for that. And so I went into her bedroom, and she said, Ivar, I've got some terrible news. You better sit down. So I thought, oh God, immediately thinking that it was either my mother or uncle, her husband, Uncle Ivar, who lived in England, or my brother or something like that. And so she told me then again about the bomb. And in some respects, I was slightly relieved that it wasn't an immediate member of my family. But then, of course, I realized that my brother George was there. And I would have been there myself, but for the fact that I wanted to find universities in the States. And of course, I immediately said, but George is there, because at this point they said Earl Mountbatten had been killed, and 3 or 4 other members of his family. And there was no more information apart from that. So we immediately tried to put a call into the UK. And of course, in those days, you couldn't direct dial. I mean, you could, but you often got a sort of a busy signal. So you had to go through the operator. So it took half an hour to schedule a call. And then eventually I called home, and my brother answered the telephone. And both of us immediately burst into tears because I realized he was still there. And I thought, I didn't understand why he had answered the telephone. And apparently it was because my brother had failed his maths O-level again. And my mother was furious and said, you better and this was on the Saturday, you better get yourself back to England, back home, because you're not going to have fun. You've got to go retake your exams. And as a result, he is still with us.
What sort of boy were you at Gordonston? What were your interests? What were you doing as a teenager?
Well, interestingly, just this last weekend, I was at a wedding with my oldest friend who was at Gordonston with me, and it was his son getting married, and another friend of ours was at Gordonston, and he said, I have this memory, you were one of the first people I ever met, and we were in the French lab, and both of us had been put into the A stream for French. And he said, I always remember thinking that you were one of the most confident people I'd ever met. And I said, you thought I was confident? And he said, yes, it struck me. It's always stayed with me as you've been confident. Which is really interesting because I never thought of myself as being confident. But clearly, I must have been. And it's interesting how where this confidence comes from. And I often think about it. And I think it is being born into the aristocracy, because a lot of the aristocracy have this inbuilt confidence that just perpetrates through, and you probably, recognize it in you having chatted to so many titled people that, maybe and a lot of people perceive it perhaps as arrogance, but I think it is just confidence. And I think it probably stems from the fact that you can lose everything. You can lose all your money. You can lose you can be on the street. But what you can't lose is the title. So you will always have that title. And so as a result, it gives you that inbuilt confidence.
Did people at school treat you differently because you were a Mountbatten?
No, I don't think so. No, at school... No, maybe
it was just a boys' school in those days. They have girls.
No, actually, it had just turned co-ed.
Was it at Gordonston you had your first crush?
Oh, yes, I think so. But crikey.
Or maybe at prep school?
Oh, prep school.
I certainly had mine first at prep school, I'm sure.
Yeah, well, that would have been boys then.
Well, everything's possible.
First crush, I suppose it probably would have been a master at school or something like that.
A master at school?
Yes, I mean, again, we're sort of getting onto the subject of my sexuality in many respects, I suppose.
We are. Where does that begin? Where does an awareness of your sexuality
I
begin?
knew really from a very young age.
What age is a very young age?
Crikey, I was 7 or 8.
7, 8?
Yeah, I think so.
And what did you know?
That I remember having a crush actually on my tutor originally. One of my... we all had summer tutors. And I think I had a crush on him initially. And he was actually one of the teachers at school. And then...
And did it puzzle you or disturb you?
No. Did it? I don't think so. I mean, maybe it did. But I just, as I say, just got on with it. It wasn't something that you talked about. I mean, interestingly, I read a book called The Velvet Rage, and it was given to me actually by a gay friend of my daughter's, and he gave it to Ella, and he said, maybe you should give this to your father. And it was a very fascinating book, and it's all about why a lot of gay men have a lot of relationships and can't seem to have stable relationships. And it all comes down, I think, from the fact that a lot of gay men are looking for validation because they didn't get it from their fathers. And as a result, if you've got two gay men that are both looking for validation from each other, it often doesn't work. So it seems that a lot of gay men have a lot of relationships because they're always looking for validation. They're not getting it from their partners. And
you didn't get it from your father because you didn't have a father.
I didn't have a father, you see. So the first chapter of this book was the little boy with a big secret. And of course that resonates with everybody because, from a young age you have this secret that perhaps, you prefer men, but of course you would never talk about it.
So you're keeping this in your head. Who's the person the human being you first say to, I think maybe I'm gay, or was that a word people used? And yes, it was by the...
I don't think I ever mentioned it.
Oh.
No, not until...
But who was the first boy you wanted to hold hands with or kissed or had a relationship with?
Wasn't until much, much later on.
Oh, so at school there were no...
Oh, no. No.
So Gordonstoun was as outward bound as we were told, as Prince Phillip
absolutely.
said.
There was none
healthy
of that.
Mind, healthy body.
Yeah.
Oh, very good. Well done.
I didn't do any of that. I had girlfriends at that point.
But was that confusing to you to have girlfriends?
No, you just got on with it.
That's what a chap did. A chap had girlfriends, but this secret person in his head had these...
desires for boys. Absolutely. But again, that was... we're born in that era when homosexuality wasn't legalized till in 67, 68 or something like that. So, and even then, if it was legalized, it certainly wasn't the norm. Not like today. I mean, it's unbelievable the difference between now and then.
And were you at that stage conscious of being part of the extended royal family?
Oh, very much so. And that was, I think, the reason why I sort of, perhaps what you would call paved yourself, didn't want to go there, because in those days there was no sort of social media. Of course, everything got into the newspaper. Everything George and I did, it was always in the newspaper somewhere along the line. So was
this other boys at school telling the stories, or just how did you get into the newspapers?
I don't know.
Or they just...
I think
they just loved a title, the Daily Mail.
Yeah, but the Daily Mail actually had a lot of informers in those days, didn't they?
Yeah.
And they
the Express too.
Yeah,
actually,
they paid 50 quid or 20 quid or whatever it was for a little bit of tittle-tattle.
Yeah. And of course, people like Lord Mountbatten and the Duke of Edinburgh were tough men. They were macho types, weren't
Absolutely.
They were real men in the old school way, as was James Bond.
Yes.
When clearly through being a Mountbatten, you spent time with the late Queen and Prince Philip, and were they friendly towards you?
Very, very friendly.
You as part of the family?
When Prince Philip died, I did a piece for the Telegraph, I think, and actually he always took a great interest in George and myself. And again, I think this may be harked back from the fact that my grandfather took a great interest in him. So in turn, he felt when my father died, he should, have an interest in us. And actually, I think my mother said, she has Alzheimer's now, so I can't sort of verify the story. But I did ask her, she did mention it. One of the first people that came to see her, I was born in the Lindo Wing in Paddington. Mm-hmm. And Prince Philip happened to be doing an event there. Actually, I think he was in the hospital. Goodness. And he heard my mother had just given birth. So he came bounding upstairs, and he came flying into the room, and my mother was furious because she clearly wasn't looking her best. And for this Adonis to come flying into the room, and she was really looking pretty awful. But what could she say? And also the doctors and the nurses certainly weren't going to say, no, you can't come in. And so I think he was one of the first people to see me. And actually, he did ask us on various holidays, and I think, from a young age we went on Britannia.
Because in the summer they used to go on that tour around Scotland, didn't they?
Yes.
Which I think the late Queen, looked forward to hugely as a sort of...
She did. And Penny and I also, we were very lucky. Prince Edward and he wasn't married at that point.
This is Penny, your wife, yeah?
Yes. He wasn't married to Sophie at that point, so he and Sophie asked us to go on the Western Isles cruise. It was the penultimate year before Britannia was going to be decommissioned. It was literally just a small party, so as the Queen, the Duke of Edinburgh arrived a few days later. So there was Edward, Sophie, Penny, myself, Alistair Bruce, and Mary Montague, Lord Montague of Bewley's daughter. And that was it. And we embarked in Portsmouth. We were told to be there at about 4:00. Unfortunately, I'd sent the luggage on the day before, and I completely misjudged the time from Moynes, which was on the Essex-Suffolk border, to get down to Portsmouth. And we were told to be there at 4:00. The Queen was going to arrive with Prince Edward at 4:30. As soon as she got on board, weighed anchor and off we went. and we arrived at 4:30. And of course, they'd closed off all the roads. So we had to run, and just as we got there, we could see Sophie and the rest of the party standing on the back of Britannia, and they were all tapping their watches, pointing at us, laughing. Just sort of tapping their watches and saying, "You naughty boys." Anyway, so we had to stand there and wait, and the Queen in the royal Rolls Royce rocks up, and they get out, and there's all the yachtsmen's families, and they whistle Her Majesty on board. And at this point, Penny is spitting mad because, I mean, clearly, this is her big chance to go on holiday with the Queen, and she can't believe that I've mucked up so badly. Anyway, so we see our chance, and all the officers had sort of shuffled out of position. We run up the gangplank, and of course they all start shuffling back into position, and they salute as we come in. And anyway, the first lieutenant then takes us back, and Her Majesty's there with Edward and Sophie and the rest of the party. And of course I say hello and profusely apologise. And she smiles, looks over her glasses, and she said, "Oh, don't worry." She said, "I'm quite used to it. The Mountbattens have always arrived after me," which was always a bit of a dig, but was actually quite amusing.
What was it like going on holiday with Elizabeth II?
Well, it was wonderful. I mean, what was it like?
What was it? Because most people acknowledge there was a kind of invisible moat around the Queen, because you were always conscious.
Oh, you are
even
always.
Though she was always natural and normal herself. Nobody was ever quite normal with her. Is that true?
That's absolutely very true. I mean, you always remember that she is the Queen, and no matter what. Even though in very intimate, you're always on your best behaviour. And every member of the family always bows first thing in the morning, and then last thing at night. And otherwise you don't bow, because otherwise you'd be bowing non-stop when she came into the room. But it was first thing in the morning and last thing at night. And technically you can't leave the room until she leaves the room. And it is always quite formal, but formal in a relaxed way.
She was fun, wasn't she?
Oh, she was great fun, and she had a great sense of humour. And there was one story which I think I've told you before. We were going up for a shooting weekend at Balmoral, and Penny and I we were living in Devon at the time, and so we were flying from Bristol Airport, and we turned up at Bristol Airport, and I had my guns in tow. And we go and check in, and the sweet check-in lady sort of says, "Oh, you're going to Aberdeen?" And I said, "Yes, I've got some guns." And she sort of looks and says, "Oh dear, I'm terribly sorry. You won't be able to take the guns on this flight." So I said, "Well, why is that?" And she said, "Well, unfortunately, the hold is accessible from the cabin, and therefore they won't be secure." So I thought, "Oh dear, this is a bit of a bore." I said, "Well, actually, hopefully that won't be a problem. Can I speak to the pilot? Because it's clearly the pilot's discretion. What we can do is we can break the guns so the barrels can go in the hold and the stock can go in the cockpit, which is lockable, of course." So, and she said, "Oh, I'm not sure about that, but let me get my manager." So the manager comes out, and the manager sort of wasn't having any of this, and she was being a bit pig-headed, and she said, "No, absolutely, you can't speak to the pilot." And I said, "Well, why not? It's his discretion." And she said, "No, you can't do that." She said, "You'll have to leave them in the car." And I said, "Oh, I can't leave firearms in the car. That's highly illegal." So she said, "Well, didn't you make a reservation for your guns?" And I said, "No, I've never made reservations for my guns. I've always just turned up. It's never been a problem." She said, "Well, not from Bristol you haven't. Maybe from Heathrow. You'll just have to fly from Heathrow." So I thought, "Oh no, she was being a bit of a bore." So I said no. I sort of decided I was going to pull rank at this point. And I said, "Well, I'm terribly sorry. I'm going to Balmoral for the weekend. I can't fly from Heathrow. The Queen's sending me a car, and she's expecting me for tea. Over to you." Anyways, that sort of focused her mind a bit, but she still wasn't letting me speak to the pilot. So she came up with a solution that we would leave them with the police in the police armory at Bristol Airport. So it's fine. So we got on the flight. Car meets me at Aberdeen, or Penny and I, and we turn up at Balmoral, and we go ushered into the drawing room and immediately go into tea. I'm sitting on the right-hand side of the Queen, and I'm kind of irritated by this story, so I repeat it to Her Majesty. And I could see that she was getting rather irritated as well. So she turns to her query, and I think it was Simon at the time, and she said, Simon, I'd like Lord Ivar's guns to be up here tomorrow morning. Please see to it. Whereupon she turns back to me and she looks at me over her glasses with a glint in her eye, and she says, they want me to open their new terminal. She says, I don't think I will now.
And was the terminal ever opened, the new terminal?
No. And so every time I go back to Bristol Airport now, it was opened by the Princess Royal, and I have a quiet laugh to myself. But anyway, that was sort of rather fun. It's rather, be able to sort of say, I don't think I'm going to open the terminal now, just was
it's
wonderful.
Small talk with the Queen.
Yeah.
You mentioned Penny a few times. What I want to know is, because you also mentioned when you were a late teenager, going out with girls, having girlfriends, as chaps do, but at the same time, in your head, you knew that what you wanted, what you fancied, what you desired, sexually at least, were boys.
Yes.
So how come you married Penny? How old were you?
I was, let me see, we got married in 94, so I was 31, because I was born in 1963. I lived in Venezuela for a while.
That explains everything.
Yeah. Well, I'm a geologist by profession, and I used to come back very regularly, and I had a very good friend. Her brother was a very good friend of mine.
Penny's brother.
Penny's brother. And he had this wonderful girl, his sister, Penny, and she was very engaging. She was one of those people that really focuses on you. When you chat, she makes you the center of your world. And I immediately fell in love with her. And, interestingly, yes.
Had you by then had any actual affairs with men?
I had had a few dalliances in Venezuela. Yeah. But they were dalliances. There were no affairs.
But you were sincere. You fell in love with her.
Yes, absolutely. She made me fall in love with her. And she was wonderful. And we had a fabulous time. And I loved her to bits. And so we got married in 94. And Ella was born in 96. Alexandra was born in 98. And Louise was born in 2002.
All good Mountbatten names.
Yes, well, Ella was after Grand Duchess Ella, who was canonized in the Russian Church. And she appears in one of the niches. You know all of this
I
because
do
you've
know,
done all of the research for Prince Phillip.
I'm bringing it out for you in one of the niches outside Westminster Abbey. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
So that's Ella.
And then Alex was named after Alexandra, the two sisters. Mm-hmm. And then Louise was named after Queen Louise of Sweden.
Lovely.
And the reason we named her after Queen Louise, because actually Queen Louise didn't have any children herself. And when she died, she left a lot of money in trust for George and myself, and it was always known as the Queen Louise of Sweden Trust Fund. So she was responsible really for paying for our school fees. And she was a wonderful character, and I think there's a wonderful story. She never expected to be the Queen of Sweden because she married Carl Adolf when he was Crown Prince. And she used to visit London and always stayed in the Hyde Park Hotel. And she used to come down to Tyndon when we were younger with her sister, Alice. So the two of them would come down together to see their nephews. And she would always, after their nephew died, my father, they would continue to always visit to make sure that my mother was looking after us suitably. And Princess Alice always used to come and have Sunday lunch with us we had a flat in London. And my mother always used to say, Aunt Alice was coming over for lunch, and our nanny used to cook. She used to do this wonderful mashed potato. Anyway, my mother would say, Aunt Alice, have you had enough to eat? And Aunt Alice would say, ooh, I do love the potato. And she said, Lilibet and Philip are going out for dinner, so I don't suppose I will get anything tonight. Which my mother always thought was very amusing, because at that point she lived at Buckingham Palace.
Of course. She died at Buckingham Palace.
Yes, she did, didn't she? And so I did mention that to the Queen once, and I said, my mother always said when Aunt Alice came round for Sunday lunch, she often said that you were going out for dinner and that she wouldn't get anything to eat. You probably, having met the Queen a number of times, probably know how she always looks over her glasses at you, and you never know what she's thinking. And actually, the wonderful thing about the Queen is I often asked her a lot of questions about the family and history and everything. And quite often when you sat next to her and you asked her something, you'd think that she hadn't heard you. And she'd always take some time to compose a reply. And I think that stems from the fact that she, being a monarch, you were never sure of who was going to repeat anything you said, and you always assumed that it was going to be repeated. So she was always conscious of formulating a proper reply and never saying anything flippant. So I remember sitting next to her a number of times and thinking, has she heard what I said? And no, it's just she was being very cognizant of what she was going to say.
She was remarkable.
Yeah.
So you have 3 girls with Penny, and then you realise that it isn't going to work in the long run.
Well,
does she realise?
No, I think ultimately, I mean, I'm not telling tales out of school because this is all well documented. Penny had quite a rough childhood. In fact, that I don't think she was, she was a love addict. And when I married her, before I married her, I did actually say that I like boys as much as girls. There's a wonderful expression, buy now, gay later. Have you not heard that?
That's very good. Buy now, gay later.
Yeah.
We don't give our episodes titles, but I think we will this time. Buy now, gay later.
Yeah.
Oh dear.
So I told her that I like boys because I didn't really want to live a lie. I really didn't want to live a lie. So I think, ordinarily maybe, a lot of girls would have run a mile.
Yeah.
Penny didn't, and I think it's because she appreciated that I loved her very much and she wanted love, and perhaps she didn't get enough love as a child or whatever, but that was one of, Anyway, I think after a number of years, she probably wanted more from me that perhaps I could give. And so sadly, she was the one that wanted to end the marriage. And I would have quite happily carried on. But interestingly, what's kind of irritating in many respects now, a lot of people say, oh, Ivor, it's wonderful to see you so happy. And I think about that, and I think, well, was I that miserable before? And apparently I was. Oh. But I didn't appreciate it. But I thought, I had a wonderful life, and I'd never really thought about it.
And when did you come out, in quotes?
Well, after we divorced in 2010, it sort of didn't fail to be noticed in Devon that Lord Ivar Mountbatten, sort of quite a grand chap living in one of the nicest houses in the county, I suppose, was single. So, there was a fair bit of interest from some of the single ladies.
Oh. The word hadn't got out.
Yeah, well, clearly. I mean, it wasn't. And I suddenly thought to myself, did I really want to go through the whole performance of lying again and not being faithful? And at that point, I did have a few dalliances locally. And I had one chap in particular, a lovely guy called Paul, and anyway, I wasn't ready to introduce him to my children and whatever, and he clearly wanted to move on. If I wasn't going to, be a proper couple, then he had other things to do, which, fair enough. Anyway, so...
By this time, had you told your daughters? Not yet.
Well, funnily enough, Ella, being the oldest, was very good at sort of, she knew something was going on.
Yeah.
So they're very good at listening
They
at the
sussed
doors.
out
Yeah,
that
they
there was
suss
some-
things out.
And did they broach it with you before you broached it with them?
No. I initially told Ella. She knew there was some big secret, you know. Wasn't sure what it was. Anyway, I then told her, and I think sweetly she said, "Oh, Pup, that's no big deal. You know, everybody at school now goes on gay weekends, and then they come back and tell everybody."
Gosh.
You know, which is, I thought, God, if you'd gone on a gay weekend with another mate at school, back in the old days, you would have been drummed out of school.
Well, the world
it would have
has
just
certainly
never
changed since my
happened.
day. My
I know.
gosh.
So she sort of took it really in her stride and said, "It's no big deal." And then
Which was lovely from your point of view.
was lovely from my point of view. And then
But they went on living with Penny.
they lived with Penny. But at that point, they were living in the lodge at the end of the drive. And you know, which worked because Penny lived there, and the girls could run backwards and forwards between the house and the lodge and whatever. And then I suppose this friend of mine, Paul, that I'd had a relationship with, he said, "When you find the right person, you'll be ready to come out." Yeah. And clearly he wasn't the right person or wasn't the right time. You know, a lot of relationships, it's always timing, isn't it?
Yeah. Is that what? And then in the end, is that what happened?
Exactly. And then I met James.
And you met James.
This was a few years later now. I met James in Verbier. I was going to the loo, and James was walking out of the loo. And we had a sort of chat. And he's quite... James is a very engaging chap. I don't think you haven't met him.
Not yet.
And he's got the gift of the gab, and he's just fabulous. And we started chatting, and then he gave me his telephone number, and he said, you know, I need somebody to ski with if you fancy skiing. So, that's how.
Was he much younger than you?
No, he's actually a year older.
Oh, well done.
Yeah.
So it was suitable.
It was suitable, and I never understand why. You know, a lot of gay men have much younger partners. Because actually, you know, you want to grow old together. And I always think that, you know, if you're sort of 17, you've got a 40-year-old husband, boyfriend, whatever, they're not going to want to look after you when you're dribbling.
So you thought this is the one.
Yeah.
Quite quickly. And he thought this is the one.
Well, what happened is we started chatting. We sort of got to know each other really on the telephone. And he then said, "Oh, there's something you should know." And I said at the same time, "Well, I think there's something you should know." And sort of James was thinking, "Oh boy, he's married." Anyway, he said he worked for British Airways. And I said, "Well, and I think he had, you know, there was this sort of stigma of perhaps being cabin service, you know, cabin crew. Had a bit of a stigma, but I said, "No, absolutely not. What a brilliant job!" And then
You were thinking immediately of the flights that you were going to get
at
a
absolutely.
special rate.
I mean, I know, and but it's all the travel, and you know, what a great job. And then I said, "Well, you know, have a look at this website," and it was our Bridwell website, and there was a picture of me, and it said Lord Ivar Mountbatten, Bridwell Park, home of Lord Ivar Mountbatten.
Oh, you didn't know at
No,
that
he
stage.
didn't know. I'd never told him who I was. I just said I was Ivor.
And then when you decided to come out,
Yeah.
you thought, I've got to do this because it's going to get into the papers anyway.
Well, what happened then was he came down and spent a lot of weekends, and I introduced him to the girls. And I think it was so sweet. He went... we were walking around the park one day, and I said, you know, that's the lodge, that's where the girls are. And he said, mental note, don't go anywhere near the lodge. Anyway, later that evening, I said, come on, let's go and meet the girls. And he said, my God. Anyway, we took them all out. Well, I think we took the younger ones, Alex and Luli, out to the pub. And at that point, Luli was probably only 12.
Oh.
And so she hadn't... I said this was just a friend, James. Yeah. And afterwards, she called Mum, and she said, Mum, Papa's got a wonderful friend. He's perfect for you.
Oh.
I know, so sweet.
It is so sweet.
I know.
Oh, dear.
Perfect for you. Anyway, They all adore James, and I think he's very engaging. Luli, being the youngest, is a classic.
And you're now married, aren't you?
We are now married.
And did the girls attend the wedding?
They attended the wedding, and so did Penny.
Well done, huh?
And Penny, actually, the girls all said, "Papa, Mummy needs to walk you down the aisle."
Oh my!
And so she did. She walked me down the aisle, gave me to James, and
Bless
said,
her, that was an interesting.
"He's all yours."
So what she said.
He's all yours. Good luck.
That is very, very funny. Did you ask her to, or the girls
No,
decided?
I did. I asked her.
Oh, bless
They
her.
came up with the idea.
Lovely idea.
Yeah, no, it was lovely. And she was very magnanimous. And
We're almost at the end of our story. I have to ask you, you've now become internationally known because you've taken part in the American series of Traitors.
yes,
Which, well, is this a spoiler for people who haven't yet seen it? You do rather well. In fact, I'll reveal it. You win.
I do.
That's fantastic. I mean,
It was a real fluke, and I have no idea how that happened. But I mean, I think ultimately I played a bit of a grey man. This was the American celebrity version, and last season John Burko was the token
the former
Brit.
Speaker
Yeah.
of the House of Commons.
And this last year I was asked, and I thought, well, why not? I hadn't really watched the programme, but I mean, my mother always said one thing. She said, try everything once. And she said, never say no to anything, because you never know where it will lead. So I thought, well, why not? It should be, it'll be fun. And I quite like doing things that take you out of your comfort zone. So I said, yeah. And it was filmed in Andros Castle in Scotland. So the American celebrity version and the UK version are virtually identical. Except the US version the compere is Alan Cummings. And yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Well, congratulations. Who knows what the future holds?
Well, exactly.
Before we end, I have to ask you to look back on your life, and I'm going to give a suggestion to you, and you've got to give me what first comes into your head. A moment of joy.
A moment of joy. There was a swimming gala, and I know I was at Tyndon, so it must have been before my father died. We only had to swim a length, so I must have been younger than 7, or was it a width? I think it was probably a width. And my mother was so surprised that I actually finished it that she got all her friends to sponsor me, and I think I was in the paper for having won or got £200 or £300, which was a lot of money in those days for the local charity. And as a result, my picture was in the paper, which I remember looking at it and thinking I was rather proud about that fact.
Wonderful. And now a moment of sadness.
Well, a moment of sadness was clearly when my father died, when I was 7. And that was the first and only real sadness, I think, in my life. Because, as I say, I've had a really fabulous life, and it's continuing to be a fabulous life.
Before we go, I must ask you about how coming out was received, how you think your family, your father, would have taken it. I think I know how the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh would have taken it, because they were immensely tolerant people and more broad-minded than the public would think them. And knowing Prince Philip, he would have been totally at ease with it.
Well, I think.
Am I right there, do you think?
Well, I think I read your book on Prince Philip in January when I was on holiday in South Africa. And I emailed you to say that I was very surprised that you had mentioned to Prince Philip that I had come out. And he said to you, whatever makes him happy, which I think is a nice, he was very tolerant.
He was very, very tolerant. What do you think?
But then he was a sailor, so I think...
Well, we're making each other laugh. Oh, dear. But have you reached, did the extended royal family, you are a Mountbatten, has there been any reaction?
No, none at all.
No, and you wouldn't really expect it?
I wouldn't expect it at all. And as you say, a lot of the royal household are staffed with gay guys.
Yeah.
So it's not like they're sort of not surrounded by it. So they're all very tolerant. I mean, in this day and age, it's
I've
not
always
an issue,
wondered
is it?
whether it can be true, that story about the late Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. You know this story, don't you?
Oh, about
Calling down
yes.
to one of the staff saying, can any one of you old queens bring this old queen a gin and tonic?
I think it may well be true, because she had a great sense of
She
humour.
did have a great sense of humour, and it would have been a gin and your bonnet anyway.
Yeah.
So, we've come to the end. What have you learned? Extraordinary life that you have led by virtue of birth and then achievement and then coming out as being gay and having to live some of that in the public gaze, and now being in a good place with a good relationship with Penny, your former wife, and with your daughters, and with a happy marriage, and which you're intending to be faithful within your marriage?
Absolutely. James, I know we'll be together for the rest of our lives.
Great.
He is just a fabulous guy. Nobody ever has a bad word to say about James. And one of the irritating things is that my nephews and nieces, they will say, "Hi, Uncle Ive, where's James?" And it's not like they wait and say, "Hi, Uncle Ivor, how are you?" This, that, and the other. Where's James? It's, "Hi, Uncle Ive, where's James?"
So you've had the validation in the end.
Absolutely.
Well done. So what have you learned? What has life taught you that you'd share?
You know, I think never shy away from anything. I mean, I think you never know what's round the corner. And that is one of the things, I have said that I've had a bit of a tortuous relationship with my mother. And it's not tortuous in that sense. It's just a bit of sadness, maybe, that she wasn't the mother that perhaps most people would have expected.
Would she have coped with this if she'd understood? Because she's now not well enough to understand.
Well, actually, it's quite funny you say that, because she has a carer, and they have a love-hate relationship. And every time I would, the carer would, every time I was in the newspaper, it would say First Gay Royal and all that malarkey. And the carer would give the newspaper to my mother. And my mother would read it, and she'd look up and she'd say, "I didn't know Ivor was gay." And this would happen every week. So I have this sort of, I've got it down perfectly as how to tell my mother that I'm gay, because I've done it every week for the last. But no, she was very tolerant. And actually, she said to my brother, she said exactly the same as Prince Phillip said: as long as he's happy, that is the main thing.
Well, I've been very happy talking to you, Ivor. Thank you so much for being part of Rosebud.
And Gyles, thank you very much indeed for having me on.